Um, there we are. So welcome. So we at the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, along with many others of you last year, were shaken and, trying to figure out the best next steps and path forward once the pandemic hit. And thankfully, WolfBrown had their COVID-19 audience outlook monitor developed quite quickly, and we were able to sign on to that project with our first deployment of surveys in September of 2020. So that was when the first round of surveys went out for us. And in that time, we've had 27 organizations who have participated either currently or in the past through the project. And we will be continuing the project through September of this year as well. And it was really important for us to be able to share these data points with our community at large so others could use the data found in whatever ways they found useful for planning reopenings, planning new programming, whether that's digital or in person, and healthy safety guidelines, and all of those fun things that we're all tackling right now. So I again want to thank all of the participating organizations that have been with us during this project. It has been a labor of love. We've all had varying levels of capacity and just different things going on throughout this time. So we really do appreciate the participation of everybody in the project. And with that, I'm going to pass it along to our programs manager, Andre Solomon, who has been very great and wonderful in coordinating all of these projects and surveys with our organizations. So to you, Andre.
Hi, so thank you everyone for being here. Definitely an important study, and also just good to know what the general public is feeling about coming back and returning. The more of the bulk of the presentation will be a little bit more about programs and attitudes, but we did think it was important to kind of highlight the demographics that we did see within the study. And so again, it's important to note that we are looking at data from active arts audiences and not the general population. And then further, that the demographic breakdown of participants reflects the audiences of participating organizations and not necessarily the demographic breakdown of residents. So looking at the data collection and seeing that the average age of survey respondents is 56, with 36 of respondents being over 65. And then looking at the racial and ethnic breakdown of the survey, respondents identified as 95% Black, 95% white, 2% Black or African American or other, 1% Asian or Pacific Islander, Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and then 1% identified as Middle Eastern or American Indian or Native Alaskan. Kind of discussing going forward about report limitations and then the need for more research. Again, this data only represents a slim piece of the pie with the overall picture regarding the attitudes and opinions of arts audiences in the region. And so again, with this white-leaning demographic breakdown, it's contributed for several issues that could happen within the arts community. For example, lack of access, interests, lack of diversity in the organizations represented within the survey cohort, and then kind of talking a little bit about the nature of the Audience Outlook Monitor did impose some limitations in terms of which organizations could participate depending on their email lists. And then also survey questions being geared more towards venues, museums, and not necessarily arts disciplines or arts education. And so again, some organizations too just didn't have the capacity to be involved in the survey, just within the pandemic, making sure that they're catering to their own organization's needs. But again, really want to thank everyone, both at the Arts Council and WolfBrown for doing this. Again, I think it's very important for us to understand what our climate thinks, and also what our climate thinks, but also individuals who didn't take participation in the survey, to understand what they may need to then engage with us in the future. And so really thank you for everyone, the researchers and all of that. And I will pass it to WolfBrown to communicate again, more so the programming and attitudes of the survey.
Thanks so much, Andre. And thank you to everyone at the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council for all of their support throughout this project. And just to reiterate again that without the organizations, the 27 organizations that have been participating, taking the time to send this survey to their audiences, we wouldn't have the data that we're looking at today. So I, again, just wanted to thank those organizations for the effort that they've put into getting this survey out and helping to collect this pool of data. My name is Megan Bander, and I have been working on the Audience Outlook Monitor at WolfBrown for the past couple of years, well, since May of 2020 when we started it. And I'll give you just a little orientation to the study, really just to second some of the context that Andre gave around who's taking this survey, and then we'll dive into looking at the results that have been collected in the greater Pittsburgh region from September of 2020 when the survey started there through May, which was our last deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and share my presentation and we'll jump in. I'll leave time for questions, and then I'll also be passing it off to my colleague, Alan Brown, who will be giving some of the big picture update from some of our other regions where we've been deploying the study and sharing a little bit about what we're thinking about communications at this moment. So you'll hear that at the end as well. Okay. So as context, the Audience Outlook Monitor is a longitudinal tracking study about audience attitudes towards going out to cultural events again. And so it was really focused on understanding, we started this in the height of the pandemic in May of 2020 and have continued throughout. So understanding during this moment of closures and lockdowns, how audiences were feeling about attending in-person events, when they might be ready to return and under what conditions they'd feel comfortable returning, but also given how long many of the organizations were closed, how they are engaging with the arts and culture sector while they're at home. So how they're watching online programs and what their experience has been doing that. So as you know, the study was deployed in the Pittsburgh region, but we also have been deploying the study in cities around the country and in a couple of sites around the world. So we've been collecting data in Australia, Canada, and a handful of Scandinavian countries as well. So 27 organizations have been deploying the survey at regular time intervals to samples of their visitors and ticket buyers. So again, everyone who's taken the survey is an active audience member or visitor at a local cultural organization, meaning that they've attended a program in the last couple of years. So we're looking at a sample of active audiences at these 27 organizations that participated. So to second Andre's point, it's not a random sample of the Pittsburgh region at large, but we've collected 6 rounds of data totaling in over 9,000 responses. And the last data that we'll be looking at in this presentation was in May. That's the last time we deployed the survey in Pittsburgh, but we'll also be deploying the survey in July, September, and November. So there'll be new data to look at pretty shortly here as the study continues. And if you're interested in more detailed results after each round of data collection, we've been publishing a short summary of key findings. Those are available both on the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council's website and on the Audience Outlook Monitor website as well. So just to share and acknowledge again, the list of 27 organizations that's been contributing to this research is up on the screen. Some of these organizations participated in 2020 and 2021, and some only participated in one of the years. But this is the pool of organizations whose audiences have been responding to this survey, just to get a sense of what segment of the arts sector we're looking at here. Okay, so with that little bit of context, we'll dive into the data itself. So in May, we saw that 69% of performing arts audiences and 62% of museum visitors said that they would attend an indoor cultural event. So this question is quite hypothetical in nature because it asks if, given the opportunity, do audiences think they would attend an indoor cultural event this week? And that acknowledges that many of the venues that people normally attended were closed at the time. So we're looking at a sort of hypothetical context here, but in breaking down this number a little bit further, we can see that there's quite a large percentage that would attend without distancing, but with masks, and a smaller percentage that would require both distancing and masks in order to feel comfortable attending. So then looking at June data from Metro Detroit, I pulled this in because we don't yet have June data from the Pittsburgh region. So I wanted to show you some of our more recent data. And because after the CDC changed its recommendation on masking, we started also asking whether people would feel comfortable attending without a mask as well. So that we see in Detroit in June, 37% of respondents said they would attend an indoor event under any circumstances. So that means they would attend without a mask and without distancing in a sort of pre-pandemic context. And we see this percent rise to actually 66% who would be willing to attend in any context for an outdoor event, keeping in mind that 31% still feel that they would require distancing and masks, and 19% feel that they would require masks only. So we're only at 13% hypothetically who wouldn't go at all, but there's a range of conditions under which the people who are ready to return would go back out. Oops. So in addition to the sort of hypothetical planned behavior, we also asked people about their actual behavior over the last 2 weeks. And so in May, 69% of Pittsburgh respondents shared that they had eaten in a local restaurant in the last 2 weeks. And we've been looking at this as sort of a leading indicator throughout. We've seen people going back to restaurants earlier than they've been going back to some performing arts venues, in part because restaurants have been opening up earlier than a lot of performing arts venues, but quite a high percentage of respondents are out doing in-person activities like going to restaurants in the community, but lower percentages of respondents reported that they've actually attended a performing arts event. So only about just under 10% had visited a museum or attended a live performance in the last 2 weeks in May. So we also, throughout the study, have tracked audience members and visitors' comfort in a variety of cultural venues. So we asked people how comfortable they'd be in the following types of cultural facilities, assuming they were open and following social distancing and other health safety guidelines. We can see that in May, comfort in every venue that we tested rose slightly. But there's still quite a range in how comfortable people feel in different kinds of venues, with the lower risk venues, things like botanical gardens or zoos, outdoor festivals or museums where people have more ability to distance themselves. People displaying pretty high levels of comfort there, and some of the higher risk activities like interactive museums, a comedy club or live music venue that might be less distance. There's still lower comfort levels in those venues. And one thing that's important to note is that all audience members and visitors won't be ready to return at the same time. Throughout the study, we've asked people if someone in their household or family is vulnerable to a serious health outcome from contracting COVID-19. And we've seen throughout that this is a pretty high percentage of the respondent pool. So back when we started this, it was 49, almost 50%. It's gone down slightly as people have been vaccinated and are reporting more frequently that they don't have a vulnerability, but still a little over a third, with 36% of respondents say that they have someone in their household who's vulnerable to a serious health outcome from contracting COVID-19. And when we use this data as a crosstab, we see that it's a pretty important view to take. People who have a vulnerable family member are almost twice as likely to report that they would not attend an indoor event this week. So it's 45% say no, compared with 25% of those who don't have a vulnerable family member or member of the household. So given that that's about a third of our sample, it's important to keep an eye on that, and we'll look at how that factors into a couple of other questions throughout this presentation. We also asked people when they believe they'll be going back to performing arts programs, given the vaccine rate and the rate of COVID-19 infections. And we saw that in May, the typical performing arts respondents believed they'd be going out in July. So we're in July now, and we'll be curious to see when we do the July data collection, how people answer now. With 18% of performing arts audiences saying that they had already returned, and 11% saying that they don't think they'll be back until January 2022 or later. So we're keeping an eye on the sort of most conservative segment of the respondent pool as well. We asked the same question of attending museums in person, and we see a higher level of comfort attending museums, with fully 37% of the sample saying that they're already attending, and June being the sort of average date when 50% of the sample says that they think they'll be back. So again, we'll continue to track this over time, but we are seeing some positive movement here, particularly for museums. And then on a sort of bright note, we've asked respondents across the survey how eager they are to return to the sending organization. And we've seen very high rates of eagerness throughout. So you can see these dark green bars at the top. The group of people that say that they're very eager to come back to the sending organization has hovered around 50% over the course of the survey. And now in May, 8% of the sample says they've in fact already been back to the sending organization. Similarly, in terms of one of the sort of pieces of good news that we've seen across this research is that our sample has consistently reported that in most cases, people will attend performing arts events and museums as often or more often as they did before the pandemic, once they feel comfortable going back and venues are open again. But interestingly, the youngest segment of our audience, those under 35, has consistently reported that they anticipate attending cultural events more than they did before the pandemic when things reopen and they're able to go back. So in May, 27% of those under 35 said that they plan to go more, and we've seen that higher percentage hold throughout the study. And throughout the study as well, a very low percentage of people has said that they plan to go back less than they did before. Okay, so now we're going to look at vaccination progress and conditions for returning to in-person events. So overall, we've seen really a tremendous vaccination rate across the sample of performing arts audiences that we've been looking at with this research. In May, 90% of the respondents were fully or partially vaccinated, and I'll note that that's well above either the national or the regional average for vaccination rates of adults. And so at this point, we're seeing that nearly everyone who's going to get vaccinated has been vaccinated. There's very low percentages of people who plan to get vaccinated but haven't yet done it. And we do see this 7% in red at the bottom of respondents that have not been vaccinated and said that they definitely or probably won't be vaccinated. So overall, there's been really terrific progress with vaccination among cultural audiences, and we've seen that in all of the sites that we've surveyed at. And then the sort of next question is, when will vaccinated folks be ready to go out again? So in May, approximately a third of the respondents who were vaccinated said that they're waiting for the infection rates to drop before they feel ready going back, with 54% of respondents saying that they're ready to go out now or as soon as it's permitted. And so you'll see that, you know, there's a slightly higher rate of readiness to attend in some of the hypothetical questions that we asked up front about whether you would attend an event this week. And part of that has to do with the fact that those questions sampled unvaccinated respondents as well. And in many cases, the unvaccinated respondents are actually more ready to go out than the vaccinated respondents. And we sort of saw that the pool of respondents that got vaccinated first was among the pool that was vulnerable to the virus, but also those who were very concerned about the pandemic. And so that pool that isn't vaccinated yet is pretty ready to go out already. And then again, we'll look at this crosstab where we break out the respondents who have a family member who's vulnerable to a serious health outcome from COVID-19. And here we can see that 63% of respondents without a vulnerability in their household are ready to go out now, compared to only 41% of respondents with a vulnerability in their household. So those people that have a member of their family that's vulnerable are waiting longer, and they're waiting until the infection rates drop further. So then we get into some of the new data, and here again, we're looking at data from Metro Detroit. These are questions that were added to the survey in June, and so we don't have data yet from Pittsburgh, but will very shortly when the survey goes out next week. We asked audience members a series of questions about what their preconditions and deal breakers for attending cultural events are. And we see a sort of challenging picture to navigate. So in June in Detroit, 48% of respondents said that they would not attend a performing arts event unless masks were required indoors. Similarly, 24% of respondents said that they would not attend a performing arts event unless proof of vaccination or a negative COVID-19 COVID test was required.
Megan?
Yes?
Sorry, this is Alan. I just wanted to correct the percent. You said 48% said they would attend on
38.
And it was 38. I just wanted to clarify.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, 38% require masks to attend, and 24% require proof of vaccination or a negative COVID test. Other sort of popular prerequisites were audiences simply stating that to the best of their knowledge, they don't have COVID-19. Looking at the flip side of this data, we also asked respondents what their deal breakers for attendance are, so what conditions they would not attend with. And so 13% of respondents reported that they would not attend a performing arts event if masks were required indoors, and 15% said they would not attend a performing arts event if proof of vaccination was required. So again, you can see that a higher percent of the respondents said that they would attend with these conditions than without them. But there's a situation where you're not going to please everyone, and the same policies are on the prerequisites and the deal breaker list for different audiences, creating a sort of challenging situation to navigate with regards to determining what health safety policies to implement and sort of when to announce those policies when so much is changing. So we'll get deeper into that as we continue, but wanted to highlight some of the new data that we're seeing in Detroit. Diving a little bit deeper into feelings around vaccinated only admittance policies, we asked respondents about their feelings about vaccinated only admittance policies. And while most respondents are favorable towards those policies, with 64% of respondents saying that they would either be more likely to attend or would only attend with a vaccinated only admittance policy, 9% of respondents said that they would not attend if a vaccinated only admittance policy were implemented. And as you can see, only 23% of respondents are neutral on this issue, and we asked some open-ended follow-up questions, digging deeper into how people feel about these policies, and saw that feelings are quite strong on both sides. So in terms of objections to vaccinated only admittance policies, people were concerned about confidentiality and felt that vaccination status is a personal matter and they shouldn't have to share that with a performing arts venue or museum in order to attend. People felt that it's discriminatory and separatist. And then other respondents shared comments that indicated that they don't believe that COVID-19 is a problem or that it's been overplayed and they're ready to just sort of get back to normal and don't want to deal with these sorts of policies. In terms of support for vaccinated only admittance policies, we saw a lot of comments around lack of trust of other people. We also saw comments around the idea that people that haven't been vaccinated don't deserve to have the same privileges and rights that as people that have been vaccinated, some very sort of heated comments on both sides. We saw comments about people feeling that it's safer if everyone is vaccinated, and also people who are concerned about transmitting the virus to others, even if they are vaccinated. So who would feel more comfortable and responsible going out to an event if everyone was vaccinated. Other comments indicated that it would just generally be less stressful for them to attend an event where they knew everyone was vaccinated. And then again, this idea of responsibility and feeling more comfortable and sort of socially responsible if they attend an event where vaccination is required because they feel it's less likely to be a super spreader event. So as we dug through these, we were even a bit surprised at just sort of how extreme some of the comments were on both sides and how tricky it may be to navigate some of these policies going forward. So then the last section that we'll look at here is engagement with digital programs and also the sort of long-term future for digital programming. So over the course of the study, there's been a significant portion of respondents who have shared that they have either watched or watched and paid for an online cultural program in the last 2 weeks. We've seen that number decline slightly, but in May, 38% of respondents still reported that within the last 2 weeks, they had watched an online cultural program. So we see a good chunk of respondents continuing that behavior even as venues are starting to reopen. And then again, we see that the respondents who said that a member of their family or household is vulnerable to a serious health outcome from COVID-19 have consistently reported slightly higher rates of using digital cultural programs. So not a huge difference, but throughout the study, that group has been using those programs at higher rates. And we're sort of thinking about digital programs as one way that as that group may take longer to feel comfortable and safe coming back to in-person events, that cultural venues can continue to serve and engage that segment of their audience. So a substantial proportion of respondents continue to report that they see a long-term potential for digital programs. So only 46% of respondents said in May that they see no role for digital programs once in-person programs open and they're able to go as often as they'd like. 46% said that they think that online cultural programs will continue to play a small role in their life, and 8% said that they feel they'll continue to play a substantial role in their life. We asked people about what kinds of digital programs have long-term appeal to them and what programs they would continue to be interested in even after every venue is reopened and they're able to resume their normal cultural behavior. And a number of programs emerged, particularly programs taking place in other cities or countries. A lot of people have shared that they've been watching programs taking place in countries around the world and that that's been a rich experience that they'd like to continue. Other people have shared that they've been watching programs in cities where they used to live and sort of reconnecting with organizations that they used to attend in person through the pandemic and that that's been something enjoyable they'd like to continue. We also saw a preference for educational programs, particularly people with children have been sharing that with school closures, they've been using digital programs at home and that they see a continued value in educational digital programming. We saw that also coming from adults with things like lectures and master classes that they've been using during the pandemic. also programs that wouldn't be convenient to attend in person. So some people have been sharing that they've been attending more as they've been able to attend programs that they ordinarily wouldn't have been able to make after work or wouldn't have been willing to navigate sort of traffic and parking to attend. And then finally, programs that would have been cost prohibitive to attend in person. And one example that we saw come up a handful of times that was quite interesting is people with children sharing that they've been watching because now they can watch programs without needing to pay for a babysitter to go. So it's interesting to think about the ways that watching from home may change the sort of financial burden placed on different groups of individuals when it comes to engaging with arts and cultural organizations. And we've been continuing to explore this, and actually in the next couple of weeks, we'll be sharing some findings from a series of interviews that we did on people's interest in digital arts and culture and the experience they've had sort of exploring this new landscape of digital programs during the pandemic. So then finally, we have 5 digital strategies that, as we've been sort of thinking about this mass of comments that we've gotten back from individuals in the survey and through interviews about the role that digital programs might play as we continue on, even after venues are fully reopened. So we've been thinking about product line extensions and expansions, and ways that digital content can be a means of expanding paid audiences for core programs. And an example of this is the sort of behavior we've seen with people watching programs from other countries and other cities. This may be a strategy that's easier to implement for some of the large organizations that have big brand name recognition, even overseas or in cities around the country. We are also thinking about brand awareness and accessibility. So when digital content can be a means of enhancing brand awareness or increasing accessibility for audiences who experience challenges. So we've seen comments from audience members that have physical disabilities, for whom digital programming has opened up a whole new realm of options for engaging with arts and culture. We've also seen people who experience other challenges getting places in person who are watching more often. We've been looking at engagement around live programs. We've heard from a lot of people who have shared that they've gotten to know conductors or artists in a more deep and intimate sense through the sort of informal Q&As or other conversational elements that they've been watching, and are thinking about whether there's a continued role for that. We've been thinking about an increase in frequency and retention. We've heard a lot of people sharing that they've been able to watch more often with the online options that are available to them, or that they've been able to reconnect with organizations that they've fallen out of touch with for one reason or another. Some people have shared that during this sort of busy period of their life, particularly parents, that they haven't been going to venues they used to engage with and are now sort of starting to reconnect. And then finally, audience development and thinking about digital content as a means of education, exposure, and expanding aesthetic boundaries. We've heard a lot of people talking about experiences of sort of trying out or exploring new genres or disciplines with the ability to kind of casually watch programs or even go back and re-listen to something as they're getting to know a new genre. So we see a lot of options, and it's been sort of an interesting and exciting topic to explore. Alan, I was going to open it up for questions before I turn it to you, but do you have anything you wanted to add to our thinking about digital before I do?
First of all, thank you for that, Megan. Excellent overview of the data. Only just to say that this is still very much an emerging marketplace. Digital content has been around for many years, but the marketplace for it, lurched forward during COVID, where I think many organizations had the strategy of just sort of replacing their programs since they could not have in-person programs. And now we have to kind of pivot and think what digital programming is sustainable, really following strategy of product differentiation. So what we're offering in the digital space is complementary to our live programming. And that's a very different headspace. So in any other sector, there'd be lots of R&D going on. We'd be trying out lots of different strategies, gauging consumer interest in different product lines, but we don't do R&D in the art sector, at least as well as we ought to. So there's a lot of spaghetti being thrown against the wall now with digital content. It will eventually shake out. It's I think a super exciting time. So I'll stop there.
Excellent, thank you, Alan. And I know that we've been through a lot of data relatively quickly as we try to sort of summarize what we've learned over the last several months. Does anyone have any questions about the findings that we've shared, other findings, or the study in general? I know that we have a sort of meeting format here, and I think we have a small enough group that if you have a question, you can go ahead and just ask it directly. If we end up getting a whole bunch of questions at once, I may switch to the chat feature. But does anyone have a question? David?
Hello. I'm curious about whether GPAC is hoping to have community convenings with arts administrators in Pittsburgh to kind of discuss the various dilemmas that these results present. Admission requirement of proof of vaccination, mask wearing, etc., and whether there's value in communicating among arts administrators to see if they're kind of collaborative or kind of group or even sector-wide strategies that might be helpful going forward. Is that in the offing, perhaps?
I can answer that question. Hey, it's Kristen at the Arts Council here. That is a good question, David. We actually have already been doing something similar to that through what we're calling our working group meetings. And Andre has been doing a great job of coordinating those since, the beginning of the pandemic, I think, really. And so different organizations based on the arts discipline have been meeting monthly, some more. We have a working group for museums, performing arts with venues, without venues, arts education, etc. And so a lot of these issues have been discussed in a collaborative nature through these meetings. Kind of how are you dealing with this mask mandate, or how are you feeling about XYZ different things. So we have been doing a lot of, I guess, sharing of resources and knowledge, if you will, in that regard. I don't expect that to stop anytime soon either, especially with the Delta variant. People are still reopening in different stages of reopening. But I agree, David, maybe a more formalized approach could be needed and good.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And we've been thinking about that a little too, just in terms of how it's going to work as, audiences are going back to a number of different venues, and the rules and policies may be different in each venue, and sort of adjusting to, like, I wear a mask here and I don't here, and these are the steps we need to take here. We've been considering too whether there's anything that we can do as a sort of sector to try to alleviate that confusion at all. Are there any other, oh, go ahead, David.
You sure? Okay. In the digital realm, you used the analogy of throwing spaghetti up against the wall, and there's been a lot of activity here in Pittsburgh, a lot of very interesting stuff. But I wonder if there's potential, or you've seen this in any other cities, of kind of more collaborative work on digital programming in ways that everybody doesn't have to reinvent the wheel each time, that there's gathering of learning or maybe collaborative projects in this new space that organizations maybe haven't done in the past. Any trends along those lines?
I've not seen that level of collaboration. I've just heard some talk, but it strikes me that, if you sort of play out the way things are going, the big institutions with lots of capital are the ones who are going to be able to sustain expensive digital programming. They may or may not be able to even pay for it on an earned revenue basis. But it strikes me, David, that the real potential here is for collaborative work around digital, creating a package of digital programs around touring productions so that audiences all over can benefit from those insights, or audience development work in, opera for dummies, courses on contemporary dance. This is the moment where if we could collaborate and get funders even to collaborate to create this fantastic digital programming that everyone could use, it could be a real game changer. And we might finally be able to do some of the long-term audience development work that we've always wanted to do, but no one can afford to do. So I'm glad you asked that, because I'm really frustrated at the lack of sort of collaboration, and I guess that's a leadership issue. And also it's our Darwinian sector, survival of the fittest, and I think that's a really bad way to manage our collective resources.
And what I worry about is if not only we've been competing with other organizations in Pittsburgh, if you're also, let's see what the Met has tonight, or what the LA Phil is doing, or whatever. And maybe
Right.
in some ways that cuts into local institutional loyalty. Not to get too Darwinian about it, but
Well, unless a Pittsburgh organization would partner with the Metropolitan Opera and say, we want to bring our audiences the best opera in the world, so we're going to have a digital series and come on down to the Benedum Center and watch opening night at the Paris Opera or whatever. There's, particularly not so much cities like Pittsburgh, but smaller cities where arts groups really are a window into the arts for their whole city. The possibilities of digital are magnificent. But we have to get out of that headspace where it's like, it's either our programs or none at all.
Thanks, Alan and David. Are there other questions? You can also feel free to type one in the chat if you prefer. I have that open as well.
Megan, maybe I should pick up here, and we'll.
I was going to say, and then if anyone has a question, feel free to type it in the chat, and I'll keep answering as Alan gives his section.
And stop me. Feel free to stop me, Megan, if there's something we should address. So just almost as a side note, I know you don't need to be told this, but at this moment in time, communications with our constituents is paramount, and being very deliberate and very careful. It has been critically important. By and large, we're seeing patrons say they're happy with the communications they're getting from the organizations. But we've just come up with a couple of sort of implications, which is the next slide here, Megan, for cultural organizations, and I won't go through this, but just to say that valuing and legitimizing people's autonomy in deciding when it's time for them to go out. I think there's a very natural tendency we have to sort of celebrate those who are ready to go out again. And we'll certainly have some wonderful reunions with them over the coming months. But I think it's absolutely critical that we keep those who are not yet ready to come out at the forefront of our thinking, because we leave them behind at our peril, I believe. And I'll have more to say about that in just a few minutes. So these will be on the recording that you get after this, so feel free to reference them afterwards. But I do want to just kind of summarize and bring in some international context here to Megan's excellent presentation. Megan, could you advance the slide?
Yeah.
Thanks. And again, there we go. So unbelievable uptake on vaccination amongst arts audiences. And that's true everywhere. There's some regional variation. And one of our cohorts is a cohort of the largest performing arts centers in the country. That cohort includes the Benedum Center. But we've seen, I think the worst I've seen anywhere is 85% vaccination. And it's in many places 95% or higher. So that really blew us away, just how fast arts audiences as a group got vaccinated. And that moment is over. Whoever's going to get vaccinated has been vaccinated. And we're going to be sitting where we are. So, you know, it's very tempting to say it's going to be safer going to the theater than it is going to the grocery store or going to the gas station, because more people will be vaccinated, you know, which is all well and good. But that's not necessarily how people think. So resumption of demand is at a very awkward place right now. You know, while most people are ready to go out, the conditions they attach to going out are widely divergent. And that's the situation that we have to manage now. And I would love it if we could manage it collaboratively. It's crazy. Every state is different. We have 16 states where vaccine passports are illegal, which is a whole nother topic I won't go into. I think David or Kristen, you could that Pennsylvania is not one of those states. Sorry to put you on the spot like that. But certainly in Florida, it's illegal to require proof of vaccination for anything. That's why they're having the big drama with the cruise industry. You know, we have this, thanks, Sarah, it's not illegal there, hopefully. So we're in this funny place, and I think we, you know, first of all, communications. You know, we have some data which suggests that maybe 3 times as many people favor policies that are more cautious and require masks than people who say, I won't come if you make me wear a mask. You know, in the arts, we want to make everyone happy all of the time. That's not going to be possible now. So I think that just argues for collaborative sector-wide policies, so that you know, so that arts groups can say we're subscribing to the regional policy, so that you're not pressed for, you know, by someone, because this is highly politicized. Feelings run very hot on both sides. And we really want to stay out of the politicization of this if we can, right? So we're focused very much, and Megan, we can come off the PowerPoint, I think, on the vaccinated folks who who are not yet ready to go out. I think the figure was 32%, Megan, for most recently for Pittsburgh.
And maybe 35, but right around there.
You know, these people are vaccinated and infection rates are down, down, down. And they're not ready to go out yet. And we've kind of known all along that there's a group of just super cautious people, some of whom undoubtedly have medical complications or risk factors. There are certainly stories of breakthrough infections of vaccinated people getting sick. Those stories are circulating. You know, but now we have the Delta variant and a lot of media coverage about that and some very alarming language coming out of the CDC around that. And I'll share a story. Megan and I were on a webinar with our partners in Australia, and they've had a totally different trajectory with COVID. They actually had successful public health, and they managed COVID down to almost nothing nationally. Like days and days were zero infections, but it would pop up, and then they would lock down a whole city. So Melbourne was locked down, and then Perth, and then Melbourne again, and now Sydney. And cultural providers had to cancel on no notice. And it's wreaked havoc on the cultural sector. And the number one reason people in Australia are not going out is because they fear cancellations. So we don't have that. And also they don't have the urgency around vaccination because they were so nearly COVID free. So they're lagging in vaccination. And unlike us, we were traumatized by the heavy death toll, psychologically traumatized. So we had more urgency around vaccination. So we were successful up to a point, right? But then we also have a body of people who have natural immunity, which is on top of vaccination. And Australians don't have that. So it's so different. But my point is that we too now are going to see cluster outbreaks, you know, trying to look forward. And I don't mean to be overly alarmist here, but a lot of folks aren't vaccinated in our country, and we're having more and more undoubtedly pernicious variants of COVID, and we're going to see cluster outbreaks, and they will be covered in the media. And there will be more fear, which is driving consumer behavior. And we have this segment of people, 30-some%, who are vaccinated and not ready to go out. And my concern is when we start seeing these cluster outbreaks, that we're going to have 15, 20, 25% of folks just staying home, regardless of what public officials say about venues. It's unlikely there would be closures. There might be regressive capacity restrictions at worst, but politically, I don't see that being viable. So my question to you is, what preparatory steps now should we be taking to prepare us for the eventuality of cluster outbreaks and sort of rising fear again? And you know, I have, as much as we are all opposed to vaccine-only admittance policies, because they would exclude some people who ought not to be excluded, I happen to think that they might be one of the ways that we survive the next 6 months or more. So those of you who have multiple performances or multiple events where you could do some open and some with a stricter test of health safety, whether that's requiring masks at some events and not at others. It seems to me that offering an enhanced safety format, whatever that looks like for you, would be a strategy for handling the seesaw of public sentiment about going out that is probably going to face us. And I know that's tricky, and I know that that's hard to implement, and it's very controversial. But I don't want us to get caught with our proverbial pants down when cluster outbreaks happen. A big segment of our audience says, "Ooh, I'm not going out," and we don't have an operational solution to that. So that's most of what I wanted to share with you today, as well as my thanks to the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council and all of the participating organizations and their patrons who took the time to take a lengthy survey. It's made a big difference nationally and internationally and in Pittsburgh. And I applaud the Arts Council for getting out a public report and maybe forwarding, those of you who can, forward along links to that report to your audiences. Because I think the more transparent we are about where things stand, and especially now with contravening beliefs about masks and vaccine-only admittance, transparency is our friend. Anyway, Megan, I see some questions coming in. Do we want to take a minute to address one?
I've been answering them as they come in the chat, and I think we're through them. But if questions continue, I'll continue to answer or share with the group, but I think we have all them answered.
Okay,
now.
I'll just also call your attention. We're doing a series of deep dive webinars on individual topics. Our last one 2 weeks ago was on digital strategies. Feel free to watch that. It's on the audienceoutlookmonitor.com website. And we've done, in the past, we've done deep dive sessions on differences by racial, ethnic cohorts, because we wanted to lift that up and really look at those differences. And we very much found that respondents of color have generally just had a more difficult time with COVID, and therefore we're more cautious about going out again. So there's a wealth of content on that website I encourage you to peruse.
And I've just shared the link in the chat if anyone wants to look through the videos available. Well, thank you, Alan. And again, to the Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council team for doing such a fantastic job. If any questions come in after we end, I'll follow up with individuals to make sure you get the answers.
Great. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
everybody.
Hang in there.
Thank you. Happy Thursday.
Thanks.
Yes, happy Thursday.